In 2010, 23-year-old Riley Hernandez disappeared in Joshua Tree National Park while exploring the Hidden Valley tectonic faults. Search teams combed every mile of hot sand and rock, but the desert remained dead silent for exactly 90 days. When all hope was lost in November of 2010, an abandoned cellar on the old Hosted Rich farm revealed its terrible secret. At the bottom of the cold dungeon was an emaciated girl whose face was completely covered by a massive wooden juniper mask attached to her head with leather straps. Why the kidnapper chose this method of enslavement and who kept Riley trapped in the underground for 3 months, you will find out in this video. The events in this story are presented as a narrative interpretation. Some elements have been altered or recreated for storytelling purposes. The morning of August 12, 2010, in Joshua Tree National Park began with a sweltering heat wave that, according to weather stations, exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was at this time that 23-year-old geology graduate student Riley Hernandez parked her silver sedan in a lot near the Hidden Valley neighborhood. According to the registration form she filled out at the entrance, she planned to explore tectonic faults on her own, expecting to return before dark. Riley had the standard set of professional equipment with her: a geological hammer, a thick-covered field diary, and a navigation system. But according to her colleagues, she often relied on paper maps of the area. Hidden Valley is known for its granite labyrinths and giant boulders, where even experienced hikers can instantly lose their bearings among the monotonous rock towers. The last activity on her cell phone was recorded by a tower in the Pool Rock area at 13 hours and 20 minutes, when Riley made a short call to her mother. According to the reconstruction of this conversation, set forth in the statement of Patricia Hernandez, her daughter's voice sounded strained. The mother later claimed that Riley mentioned an atypical sense of threat, as if someone was watching her movements from behind the rocks, but attributed it to sun fatigue. This detail later became a key point of reference in the investigation materials, indicating that the girl's psychological discomfort had a specific cause in the middle of the day. When Riley failed to show up at the meeting point at 20 hours 00 minutes and did not answer 8 consecutive calls from her parents, it became clear that the situation had gone beyond a normal delay. The testimony of the parents indicates a state of critical emotional tension that was growing by the minute. At 24 hours 45 minutes, Riley's father officially notified the Ranger Service that he had lost contact with his daughter. For the next 10 hours, he studied maps of the area on his own, trying to identify possible points of deviation from the route, but the granite massifs of Joshua Tree reliably hid any traces. Search operations officially began at 5:30 the next morning with 2 ranger teams and 4 canine teams. The rescue headquarters stated that the girl's car was stationary. The doors were locked with the central locking, and there were no signs of a struggle or tampering inside. The car keys were missing, indicating that Riley had taken them with her when she went to the trail. During the morning hours of August 13th, searchers combed a 2-mile radius around the parking lot, but no visual evidence of a human presence in the rocky areas was found. The soil conditions in the area, consisting mainly of coarse sand and gravel, are extremely poor for holding shoe prints, especially in gusty desert winds. The family of the missing person was waiting for updates every 15 minutes, but the radios of the search teams brought only short reports of no results. The helicopter used in the afternoon did not record any bright elements of equipment among the gray-brown rocks. The complete absence of the girl's personal belongings, such as a water bottle or a geological hammer case, which are usually lost in a fall, was the first signal of the anomalous nature of the event. According to the official conclusion of the head of the search operation, the absence of any evidence of an accident in the terrain forced a reclassification of the case. On the evening of August 14th, the materials were transferred to the district police department with a note about the possible abduction. The eerie silence of Hidden Valley, where every sound reflects off the stone walls, only emphasized the mystery of the disappearance of a graduate student who had professional survival skills in the field. Every foot of rocky trail traveled only plunged the investigation deeper into a state of uncertainty, as Riley Hernandez disappeared into the desert, leaving no material evidence of her presence after that one alarm call at 13 hours and 20 minutes. On November 15, 2010, exactly 93 days have passed since the official disappearance of 23-year-old Riley Hernandez, when the active phase of the search and rescue operation was finally terminated due to the lack of any new leads. The territory of Joshua Tree National Park was preparing for the winter season, and Riley's case had already been classified as unsolved, until a random check brought a gruesome conclusion. During a routine maintenance inspection of the remote areas of the Hosted Reach farm, bordering an old abandoned quarry, one of the rangers noticed an atypical metal structure peeking out from under the rubble of dry brush and rocky soil. It turned out to be an improvised ventilation pipe, carefully disguised as a natural rock outcropping with sand and granite fragments. When the investigative team arrived, they found a heavy wooden floor of an old root cellar that had been considered filled in and unusable for decades under a layer of brushwood. After opening the entrance, the officers found themselves facing a dark chasm about 10 feet deep. Going down into the dungeon, the rescuers found a living woman whose figure in the weak light of the flashlights looked as unrealistic as possible because of one detail. Her face was completely hidden under a massive wooden mask made of a single piece of mountain juniper. The structure was secured to her head with intricate leather belts with metal buckles that were tightly embedded in her skin, leaving the prisoner no chance of removing the mask on her own. A medical report drawn up immediately after the evacuation documented the girl's state of extreme emaciation. She weighed only 92 pounds, which was a critical figure for her height. The doctors diagnosed a severe form of vitamin deficiency, anemia, and specific skin changes caused by prolonged lack of sunlight and fresh air. Riley Hernandez was in a state of deep psychological dissociation and complete catatonia. She did not respond to the officers' loud verbal appeals, showed no signs of fear or joy at being rescued, and continued to remain absolutely silent, looking into the void through narrow cracks in the wood. On her ankles and wrists, forensic experts recorded deep ring-shaped scars, marks from prolonged wearing of steel shackles which, according to the investigation, limited her movement to only 3 feet around the makeshift sleeping area. The location of the discovery was 15 miles from the initial search area in Hidden Valley, which completely eliminated any possibility of her moving across the rough terrain on her own in her physical condition. During the inspection of the dungeon, forensic experts seized numerous pieces of evidence of a long stay. Empty plastic food containers with labeling and production dates confirming that the prisoner had been there since her disappearance. Investigators noted that the cellar was kept in a certain order, and water supplies were regularly renewed, indicating the methodical and disciplined nature of the kidnapper. The testimonies of eyewitnesses who first saw the girl after she was brought to the surface describe her appearance as something beyond the scope of a normal criminal offense. The wooden juniper mask became a symbol of identity deprivation and total control for everyone. Police reports indicate that the room was equipped with a primitive but functional lighting system powered by batteries that were fresh at the time of discovery. Doctors interviewed later confirmed that Riley avoided any visual contact even after the mask was carefully removed in the sterile conditions of the hospital. The condition of the cellar room, the smell of damp earth mixed with antiseptics, and the careful disguise of the entrance indicated that the attacker had professional engineering skills and in-depth knowledge of the park's topography. Every square inch of Hostage Reach Farm had now become a collection site for the smallest particles of biological material. But initial analysis showed that the thief had been extremely careful to leave no visible signs of struggle or mistakes in his plan. Riley remained a living witness to the horror that lasted 90 days, but her silence and the wooden face left in the cellar as physical evidence raised more questions than they answered. It was obvious that behind every element of her detention was someone's morbid calculation aimed at complete subjugation of the individual, and the location of the prison in such a remote sector of the park testified to the perpetrator's confidence in his own impunity. Even after being hospitalized, the girl continued to hold her hands as if they were still chained, which became one of the most emotionally difficult details in the reports of the officers who accompanied her from the scene. The farm was surrounded by yellow tape, and every stone within 100 yards was documented as the investigation realized they were dealing with a man who had turned part of a national park into a private torture chamber, remaining invisible to hundreds of rescuers for 3 whole months. The first full-scale investigation at the site of Riley Hernandez's discovery, which began on November 17, 2010, was confronted with the unprecedented methodicality of the perpetrator, which effectively nullified the efforts of the county's best forensic scientists. Every square inch of the dungeon at Hosted Reach Farm was analyzed using ultraviolet light and chemicals, but the results were stunning because of its absolute emptiness. The investigative team found that the room had been treated with an aggressive sodium hypochlorite solution, indicating that the perpetrator was deeply familiar with forensic methods and procedures for extracting biological material. No fingerprints or epidermal particles of the kidnapper were found on the walls, metal chains, or even on the remains of the plastic containers. The reaction of police officers to this complete lack of clues was recorded in reports as a state of professional despair, as every line of investigation hit a perfectly clean wall. The leadership of the county police department stated that the attacker had left no material trace despite being confined to the cellar for 90 days, which was evidence of surgical discipline and the constant use of personal protective equipment. Sergeant Harvey noted that the police were in a state of complete helplessness, as even the involvement of federal FBI analysts did not yield results during the first week of intensive work. Attempts to find clothing fibers or soil particles on the ventilation pipe resulted in reports of no identifiable material. Interviewed residents of the few ranches within a 10-mile radius of the farm claimed not to have seen any unauthorized persons or suspicious vehicles in the area. The lack of public testimony led investigators to assume that the perpetrator was a highly trained individual with knowledge of hidden routes in Joshua Tree Park that were not marked on official maps. Riley Hernandez, who was transferred to the medical unit, continued to remain completely silent under the round-the-clock supervision of the guards. Psychologists recorded only vegetative reactions of horror at the mention of the dungeon or when trying to discuss the details of life in captivity. Each new meeting of the special investigative team ended with the statement that there was no material evidence to bring suspicion. Detectives checked more than 500 transactions at hardware stores in an attempt to trace the purchase of the disguises. But this path proved to be a dead end due to the use of cash. Sergeant Harvey emphasized that they were dealing with someone who had studied in detail the weaknesses of the police system and the methodology of collecting physical evidence in the field. Medical testimony indicated that Riley perceived any movement at her door as a source of mortal danger, which indicated a deep trauma from total psychological pressure. The inability to obtain even a minimal description of the kidnapper from the victim created a vacuum in which the police were forced to work blindly. Official reports stated that even after using laser scanners, the only smell in the room was a persistent, sterile chlorine odor that had replaced any human odors. The sense of powerlessness was exacerbated by media pressure demanding immediate answers in what has become the most high-profile incident in the national park in the past decade. The department's leadership recognized that without new leads, the investigation risked turning into a collection of assumptions as the attacker acted as a shadow. Every next foot of the area around the quarry only confirmed the theory that the kidnapper was either a local resident or a former park employee who knew the patrol schedules perfectly. A psychological profile from Quantico described the perpetrator as a person with impeccable self-control who could keep a secret for years. Riley, whose life turned into 3 months of isolation with a wooden face mask, was the only living witness, but her memory was securely blocked. The investigation continued in a 24/7 mode, analyzing the smallest details of the ventilation shaft construction and the knots on the leather straps of the mask, hoping for at least one microscopic mistake. Abandoned buildings within a 5-mile radius were also inconclusive, either empty or covered with sand. The police reported checking property ownership records, but the hosted Reach Farm was legally owned by a deceased person whose heirs had not visited California in 12 years. This legal chaos only served the attacker well, allowing him to set up an underground prison in a place that did not formally exist for mail couriers. Every detail, from the type of batteries in the lights to the way the ventilation tube was attached, showed that the preparation for the crime had been underway for several months before August 12th. Sergeant Harvey summarized in his weekly report that without active assistance from Riley or a chance discovery, identifying the hijacker would be a matter of time. The sterility of the crime scene has become its main characteristic, turning the investigation into a fight against an invisible enemy. The emptiness left by the kidnapper was so perfect that it made the investigators feel that everything that happened in the heart of the national park was unreal. Even a week after the rescue, the farm remained under guard, but the desert and chemicals kept the secret of who put the juniper mask on Riley Hernandez. Before we move on to the next part of this chilling story, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and like this video. This is extremely important because YouTube's algorithms see your activity and help promote this video so that it can be viewed by as many people as possible, and Riley Hernandez's story does not go unnoticed. A new phase of the investigation began after a highly sophisticated examination of the mask's leather fasteners at the California State Crime Laboratory. Specialists studying the structure of the belts under multiple magnification found barely visible hot-stamped inventory numbers on the inside of the belts. These serial codes, as it was established in 2 days, belong to the Desert Edge Rescue Service, a specialized company that supplies professional equipment exclusively to government agencies, including units of the National Park Service. At the same time, the results of the wood analysis of the mask itself, which was removed from Riley Hernandez's face, were obtained. Laboratory tests confirmed that it was made of solid mountain juniper, which grows only in the northern highlands of Joshua Tree Park, where access for ordinary tourists is strictly limited or requires special permission. This discovery was a key factor in the case, as the vector of suspicion instantly shifted to current park officials. Investigators launched an extensive review of internal equipment issuance and retirement logs over the past 12 months, attempting to track down every piece of leather gear that had been decommissioned or reported lost. During a second, more thorough search of the cellar at hosted Reach Farm, forensic scientists found empty bottles of a broad-spectrum professional antiseptic under a layer of straw. According to the conclusion of a toxicological examination, such a product is used only in first aid kits for rescuers and is not available for free sale in civilian pharmacy chains. Dialogues between detectives during this period, according to the testimony of the department's office staff, became as brief and official as possible. An atmosphere of deep suspicion of internal betrayal among the staff hung in the air, who for 3 months simulated an active search for the girl. The investigative team found that the perpetrator had free access to the quarry service gate, which fully explained the absence of any signs of forced entry at the entrance to the abandoned farm. Each new discovery, from a specific method of wood processing to the chemical composition of the disinfectant, only strengthened the theory that the thief was a person with an impeccable reputation and extensive experience in the field. A person who knew every hidden area under camera surveillance and patrol schedules used his official authority and access to confidential information to provide the perfect cover for criminal activity. Sergeant Harvey, in his report of November 20, 2010, noted that they were not just looking for a criminal, but a colleague who had turned his professional skills into tools for sophisticated torture. Checking the personal files of the employees became a priority, but the difficulty was that more than 40 people had access to the northern sectors of the park where the mountain juniper grew. An analysis of the duty schedules for August to October showed that several rangers repeatedly stayed for night shifts in the area of the hosted Reach Farm, explaining that they needed to control the quarry perimeter from trespassers. This detail in the activity logs allowed the investigation to narrow the circle of suspects to 10 people, all of whom had high qualification scores in tactical medicine and survival in extreme conditions. The feeling that the enemy was in the same room as them forced investigators to work in strict secrecy, limiting access to new data even for their closest assistants. The inventory numbers on the mask belts became the digital imprint that the criminal could not completely remove, despite his maniacal attention to cleanliness in the cellar. The police realized that the kidnapper felt like a master in this part of the desert, not expecting the girl to be found before he decided to complete his process. Official inquiries to Desert Edge confirmed that a batch of equipment with these numbers was shipped to the Joshua Tree Park headquarters exactly 2 years ago. The investigation has effectively turned into a manhunt for a man who has been hiding behind a badge and uniform for years, using the community's trust as a perfect shield to hide an underground prison. Every move the detectives made was now accompanied by a check on their own ranks, as Riley's captor had demonstrated an ability to anticipate standard investigative moves. The use of an official antiseptic and access to closed areas of the park indicated that the criminal had integrated his secret life into his daily professional routine so skillfully that none of his partners suspected anything was amiss for 90 days. The juniper mask, made with such care, became not only a piece of physical evidence for the investigation, but also a key to understanding the identity of someone who knew the geography of the northern slopes so well. The situation around the investigation was becoming critical, as every hour of delay gave the attacker a chance to realize that the ring around him was gradually shrinking. The psychological state of Riley Hernandez during her stay at Twentine and Palms Medical Center was described by doctors as a state of deep reactive trauma, where the main trigger was any manifestation of official authority. According to the medical observation protocols, the girl demonstrated acute panic attacks when approaching staff dressed in official uniforms. The nurses on duty recorded in their reports that when they saw a light brown ranger shirt or a dark blue police officer's uniform in the corridor, Riley would instantly shudder, try to hide under the covers, or crawl into the corner of the bed, completely losing the ability to communicate verbally. The doctors noted that her vocal apparatus was physically healthy, but the mental block caused by being in the cellar erased her ability to speak in the presence of those she associated with power. In parallel with the girl's treatment, the investigation team delved into the national park's human resources records and police reports from the past 5 years. As a result of this analytical work, the team discovered a closed case about the tragic death of a 20-year-old student named Sarah, which occurred in the northern sector of the park during a failed rescue operation. According to the documents of the time, 34-year-old Carter Baker, an experienced rescuer with an impeccable record, was the officer responsible for her evacuation from the rocky outcrop. However, the operation ended in the girl's death due to her sudden panic attack, which led to a fall from a great height. Testimonies from Baker's colleagues at the time indicated that after the incident, his personality underwent irreversible changes. He fell into a severe post-traumatic state, which transformed into a pathological fixation on security control. Investigators interviewing Carter's former partners found out that he had developed the illusion that nature was a source of chaos, and that complete isolation of the object in a completely closed and controlled space was the only effective way to guarantee survival. The investigation received documentary evidence from time logs that over the past 7 months, Baker had regularly and persistently requested night shifts in the area of the hosted Reach farm, motivated by a desire to prevent acts of vandalism at the old quarry. He remained a model employee for park officials, but it was now clear that for Carter, Riley was not just a victim of kidnapping, but a subject to fulfill his warped, maniacal instinct for protection. He believed that by keeping her underground and removing her face with a mask, he was saving her from the dangers of the outside world that had once taken Sarah's life. The psychological pressure exerted on the girl through deprivation of sensory perception and total isolation was officially qualified by forensic experts as a form of torture, despite the complete absence of direct evidence of physical violence in medical reports. Baker's every action, from the choice of juniper wood to the schedule of water supply, was part of his personal security protocol, where the prisoner was to be deprived of her liberty for the sake of her own integrity. Psychologists emphasized that Baker was not trying to inflict pain in the classical sense. He was trying to create a sterile environment where he was the only link between Riley and reality. This is what made his actions particularly dangerous, as he acted not out of hatred, but out of a twisted sense of duty that turned him into a jailer. Sergeant Harvey, studying records of Baker's previous career, noted in his report that the perpetrator had access to the psychological profiles of many tourists who checked in at the park, and Riley, as a lone explorer, was ideally suited to be the subject for his absolute salvation experiment. Each new testimony from his past only confirmed that behind the mask of a professional lifeguard was a man who had long since lost the line between protection and destruction of the individual. The doctors continued to record tremors in Riley's hands every time a heavy footstep sound was heard in the corridor, identical to what she had heard over her head for 90 days in the dungeon. The case finally had a prime suspect, but Carter Baker still had access to official communication channels, making further police action extremely risky. Riley's condition remained consistently serious, and her silence was the loudest proof yet of how effective the control system built by the man who had once sworn to protect life within Joshua Tree National Park had been. Investigators realized that every day Baker was on duty posed a threat to new visitors, as his need for control could require new subjects for his underground hideout. The archival documents about Sarah's death became the foundation on which the prosecution now built, demonstrating the chain of events that led to the transformation of a lifeguard into the architect of an underground prison. Baker used his knowledge of human physiology to keep Riley on the edge of life and death, not letting her completely fade away, but also not allowing her to remain a person with her own voice and face. A psychological evaluation would later call this a God in lifeguard complex, where controlling someone else's breathing becomes the only compensation for one's own past mistakes. Every report, every protocol, and every detail of his service history was now being carefully sifted through the sieve of investigation, revealing the structure of the madness that was hiding under the perfectly ironed uniform. Riley Hernandez's panic attacks were not just a symptom of the disease. They were a signaling system that indicated that true evil often wears a badge and promises salvation. Further investigation now depended on how quickly direct evidence could be obtained from Carter Baker's personal space, before he realized that his security system had been exposed through microscopic serial numbers on the leather straps of his juniper mask. On November 22, 2010, at 9 o'clock in the morning, a team of detectives and forensic scientists began an authorized search of Carter Baker's private residence in the town of Tenton and Palms. The key object of attention was the garage, which looked no different from the neighboring buildings, but inside it hid evidence of maniacal crime preparation. At the back of the premises, a professional workshop was set up, where numerous charcoal and pencil sketches of human faces were placed on a wide work table under bright lighting. According to the inspection report, each image was focused on capturing the extreme states of fear, panic, and complete helplessness, indicating the suspect's deep psychological fixation on the emotional suffering of his victims. The most striking discovery was a metal safe in which, among Baker's personal belongings, 48 color photographs of Riley Hernandez, taken with a professional camera with a long focus lens, were found. The analysis of these materials confirmed that the girl had been under surveillance for 14 days before her official disappearance on August 12th. The investigation was able to see the detailed dynamics of the persecution. The pictures recorded every step of the girl along the trails of the national park, her lunches alone, and even those moments when she stopped as if she felt someone's eyes on her. The reaction of the participants in the search was recorded in official reports as a state of deep emotional shock at the realization of how cold-bloodedly and thoroughly each stage of the abduction had been planned. In the built-in closet of the garage, forensic experts found stocks of canned food, plastic containers, and specific chlorine-based disinfectants that were absolutely identical in chemical composition and batch numbers to those found in the underground cellar at Hosted Ridge Farm. This finally confirmed Carter Baker's direct connection to the place where the prisoner was held for a long time. However, the suspect himself was no longer in the house when the search was completed. Attempts to establish his whereabouts through official communication channels yielded no results. The mobile operator's data, obtained at the urgent request of the investigation, showed that Carter Baker turned off his phone at exactly 14 hours and 30 minutes, immediately after he received an official summons to the police station to provide additional testimony as a witness. His many years of professional knowledge of the blind spots of CCTV cameras and patrolling schedules of city streets allowed him to leave the city completely undetected by technical means of control. The garage also contained fragments of mountain juniper wood and carving tools covered with fine dust that matched the material of the mask seized from Riley Hernandez. Investigators noted that Baker acted with extreme caution, leaving no notes or messages that could indicate his further escape route. Every element of the workshop that was discovered indicated that Carter Baker had turned his life into a methodical hunt, where the skills of a lifeguard were used to become an elusive predator. Sergeant Harvey, inspecting the suspect's workplace, noted in his report that every detail in the garage, from the perfect arrangement of tools to the careful archiving of the victim's photos, betrayed a person with a pathological need for total order and absolute control over the situation. The absence of Baker's personal car near the house only confirmed the theory that he had begun to implement a pre-prepared escape plan deep into the national park, which he knew better than any other employee. The investigative team stated that the criminal was several hours ahead of law enforcement agencies, taking advantage of the very professional trust that he had so diligently built over the years of service. The entire perimeter of the property in Twantanane Palms was cordoned off and secured, but the empty workshop with the images of frozen horror on paper was the only evidence that Carter Baker was no longer going to play the role of rescuer. Now the police's goal was to find a person who had all the resources and knowledge to survive in the desert for a long time, remaining invisible to search teams and aircraft. Every minute of delay gave Baker the opportunity to disappear into the maze of granite rocks, where he felt much safer than in the civilized world. The photographs of Riley Hernandez found in his safe were not just proof of guilt, but a silent reminder of how close the enemy had gotten to his victim long before he stepped foot in Joshua Tree Park. The search ended late in the evening, leaving investigators with the knowledge that they were dealing with a professional who makes no accidental mistakes and views every detail of her crime as part of a large engineering project. Riley's photographs, which captured her in the most vulnerable moments of her last free day, now became the main exhibits in the case that revealed the true face of Carter Baker, a man who had learned to hunt in the shadows of the very rocks he was supposed to protect. On November 24, 2010, the investigation finally shifted its main focus to the remote northern sectors of Joshua Tree National Park, where, according to preliminary analysts' assumptions, Carter Baker had a network of pre-prepared hideouts. The county's SWAT teams, along with experienced rangers who knew the suspect's training and endurance, understood that he would not attempt to leave the state via conventional highways, but would instead choose to travel through the most inaccessible parts of the canyons. At 25 hours and 15 minutes local time, a tactical capture team using thermal imagers to scan deep rock crevices discovered Baker's temporary camp in a small cave near Quill Valley. When officers in full combat gear entered, they saw the remains of a campfire still smoking and an open water canteen with condensation still on it, indicating that Carter Baker had left the location just minutes before the assault, likely after hearing the low-frequency sound of a low-altitude helicopter approaching. A thorough forensic examination of the cave revealed Carter's field diary, which later became the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. It was on the basis of his handwritten notes that the investigation was able to reconstruct the real reason why he held Riley Hernandez in such cruel and inhumane conditions. In his diary, Baker described in detail, step by step, the process of choosing juniper wood and the painstaking work of many days on the shape of the mask, noting that the wooden face was a necessary tool to maintain his own psychological peace. He wrote in his own handwriting that he could not bear the direct sight of the girl's panic and tears, as her natural emotional reactions became an unbearable trigger for him, bringing him back to the memories of the tragic death of 20-year-old Sarah 5 years earlier. For Baker, the mask was a specific way to turn a living, suffering person into a motionless, controllable, and mute object that he could protect in his distorted sense, completely unconcerned with the reality of her physical and mental suffering. The darkness and strong, cold desert wind, which according to weather stations that night reached 45 miles per hour, greatly complicated the pursuit operation in conditions of almost zero visibility among the sharp granite boulders. The dialogues between the officers on the radio, recorded in the operational log of the headquarters, were extremely brief, sharp, and tense. Each participant in the operation understood the critically high risk of being ambushed by a man who had studied every foot of this terrain for 10 years. At 3 o'clock in the morning, on a steep, rocky trail leading to the remote southern border of the reserve, one of the searchers found Carter Baker's abandoned service badge lying in the middle of the path, glinting in the flashlight. This discovery became a symbolic confirmation for the detectives of his final break with reality and his official status as a rescuer. The investigation revealed that Baker was moving toward the southern exit of the park using pre-prepared and disguised supplies of drinking water and high-calorie food that he had placed at key points along the route months before the crime. He could not be apprehended before crossing the sector border due to an unfortunate technical delay in receiving and transmitting data on an old white SUV that he was likely using to move quickly off the main paved roads. Information about the specific vehicle was only received by the Coordination Center when Baker had already left the area of possible effective interception. The investigation officially stated that the suspect had escaped several hours before the full blockade of the southbound direction was established, skillfully taking advantage of the knowledge of all existing blind spots in the national park's technical surveillance system. The search teams were forced to stop active pursuit only at dawn due to the complete physical exhaustion of the personnel and the inability to accurately track the treads on the hard rocky plateau. Carter Baker's diary remained in the hands of law enforcement as a silent and eerie testament to the twisted intelligence of a man who deliberately turned a noble act of rescue into a tool for total oppression of the individual. Despite the urgent involvement of significant federal resources and aircraft, the desert once again safely concealed the one who knew its secret trails and hidden caves better than anyone else, leaving behind only a heavy sense of anxiety and professional incompleteness in the hearts of those who participated in the night raid. Every detail discovered in the cave near Quill Valley, from the meticulous way he folded his change of clothes to the choice of a strategic location for a short rest, indicated that Baker viewed the park's territory as his personal impregnable fortress, where he had the right to dictate his own rules of life, death, and identity. Radio intercepts during this period documented a state of confusion among rank-and-file park employees who could not believe that their colleague could so easily circumvent all established security protocols. Sergeant Harvey later noted that Baker was not acting as a fugitive, but as the owner of the territory who simply moved to another part of his property, leaving his pursuers far behind. Investigators also found that another wooden workpiece was found in the cave, work on which had just begun, indicating Baker's possible plans for new victims or further transformation of Riley if she had not been found in time. The cold wind of that morning seemed to have washed away all the smells and small traces from the place where the criminal had last stopped, making further searching with dogs completely futile. Carter Baker disappeared into the labyrinths of Joshua Tree, leaving behind only the mask that became the #1 piece of evidence and a badge trampled into the sand as a sign of complete rejection of human morality and the law. The trial in the high-profile case of the state of California against Carter Baker officially began on February 15, 2011, in Courtroom 4 of the San Bernardino County Court. The atmosphere inside the room was recorded by the journalists present as extremely tense and depressing, as the defendant's seat remained empty due to the antagonist's successful escape deep into the national park several months before. The empty wooden chair on which the former rescue worker was supposed to sit became a silent symbol of the professional defeat of the law enforcement system, which allowed the criminal to escape using his own professional knowledge of the desert. The reaction of Riley Hernandez's parents to every word the prosecutor said was recorded by court stenographers as a state of deep grief and complete physical exhaustion. Patricia Hernandez held a small photograph of her daughter taken before the fatal geological expedition in her hands throughout the hearing. When the public prosecutor showed the main exhibit, a wild juniper mask with rough leather straps, the room fell silent, interrupted only by the mother's soft crying. Riley Hernandez categorically refused to appear in court in person, as psychologists concluded that any visual contact with an environment reminiscent of her captivity could cause an irreversible mental breakdown. Instead, she submitted a 42-page affidavit detailing the 3 months she spent in complete isolation in an underground cellar at Hostage Ridge Farm. In these documents, read by the court clerk for 2 hours, the girl described the feeling of complete loss of her own identity due to the constant wearing of a mask, which she said had become part of her flesh. Riley recalled that her only way of telling time was the sound of Baker's footsteps overhead and the regularity with which he brought plastic containers of water and food, never making verbal contact with her. The girl's testimony indicated that Carter Baker had created a world for her where nothing existed but darkness, moisture, and the smell of antiseptics. The judge, after reviewing the results of the search of Baker's garage in Tenton and Palms and forensic reports on the identity of the chemicals, announced the verdict. Carter Baker was found guilty of kidnapping with extreme cruelty and systematic torture. He was sentenced in absentia to 30 years in a maximum security prison without the possibility of any early release. The psychological impact of the horror on Riley was devastating and irreversible. The talented graduate student who dreamed of a scientific career stopped all geology classes forever as open landscapes and rock masses became a source of uncontrollable fear for her. The girl developed an acute pathological phobia of any enclosed spaces without windows, which forced her to change her lifestyle to one where she could constantly be outdoors under the supervision of specialists. In their official statements after the verdict was announced, Riley's family members noted that the paper did not bring them a sense of closure or justice, as the man who methodically destroyed their daughter's identity for 90 days was still at large. The final session of the trial ended at 17 hours and 40 minutes, leaving them with a sense of deep insecurity. The realization that evil was hiding beneath the perfectly pressed ranger uniform and public service badge forever changed the local community's attitude toward the National Park Service. Riley Hernandez remained in the memory of the residents of the county as a person whose future was cynically trampled on by the one who, by professional duty, was supposed to be her first rescuer. Baker's case was officially classified as unsolved in the context of physical detention, and his portrait in profile and full face continues to hang on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's wanted posters. According to detectives who continued to monitor activity in Joshua Tree Park in the northern sectors near Quill Valley, hikers continued to occasionally find strange markings on rocks that could have belonged to the fugitive. But none of this evidence was visually confirmed. Riley tried to start her life anew in another state, but in her every movement and in every long pause during a conversation, witnesses saw the shadow of the same wooden mask that became her only face for 3 months. The story of this case has become a dark legend of the national park, reminding every visitor that danger in the wild does not always come from predators or cliffs, but sometimes from a person who knows every trail better than you do and knows how to wait in the shadow of granite rocks. Most of the archives in the State versus Baker case have been sealed, but the photograph of the empty dungeon at Hosted Ridge Farm will forever remain a major reminder of how easily professionalism can be turned into a tool for the perfect crime. The Hernandez family eventually changed their last name and moved to the East Coast, trying to find peace away from the desert that had robbed their daughter of her ability to see the world without fear. But for the San Bernardino police, Carter Baker remains the ghost of Joshua Tree, whom they were never able to catch up with on that windy night in November 2010. Even 10 years after the trial in the courtroom, according to the guards, it sometimes seems that the faint smell of juniper sawdust and chlorine that accompanied every minute of that investigation can still be felt in the corners. Justice turned out to be just a formality on paper, while Riley's real life became a daily attempt to forget the sound of footsteps outside the door she now always kept open.